Welcome back to Silicon Bites. This is our daily roundup of some of the most important news stories and indeed coverage of some stories that perhaps didn't get enough focus in mainstream media. Thank you to everybody who has supported the channel, everybody who buys me a coffee or becomes a patron. It's massively important and it helps to keep the channel going. It helps me to do this work every day, which I feel is necessary and hopefully you feel is necessary too. Today we're going to be looking at North Koreans. Is it true they have quit Kursk? Are they likely to come back again? These are some of the questions we're going to be examining in this short episode. North Koreans may have pulled out of the front line. At least this is the claim coming from officials in Ukraine. Ukrainian special forces fighting in the Kursk region, which is where the North Koreans thought to be concentrated, told the BBC they have not seen any North Korean troops there for the past 3 weeks. Ukraine's Special Operations Force, SOF spokesperson, Colonel Oleksandr Kindratenko, said it was likely they had pulled out after suffering heavy losses. So just how upset is Kim Jong Un with Putin at this humiliating blow? Neither Russia nor North Korea release casualty figures or even admit openly that those troops are fighting on Russian soil. But estimates suggest that out of some 11,000 troops sent to fight, at a minimum 1,000 have been killed in just 3 months. Possibly the figure of killed and injured is far higher than that. If the speculation is true, it suggests significant North Korean casualties, because of which they have been pulled off the front lines. The concern among Ukrainian experts and Western officials is that the withdrawal may not be permanent. There is a possibility, of course, that North Korean soldiers could return after receiving additional training and in far greater numbers. But the Russians would have to come up with new ways of deploying them to avoid a repeat of the heavy casualties. Also, we have to ask, what is the withdrawal of North Korean troops going to do to the Russians' ability to make incremental gains in Kursk, retaking some of the territory that was lost to Ukraine last year? South Korean intelligence say North Koreans are unprepared for the realities of modern warfare, and they certainly seem to have been very vulnerable to Ukrainian drones. They lost the combat capability of this first package of North Koreans, Zelensky said. I can't call them anything else because it's a package. They don't know where they're going, and they're fighting against a country they've never been to. It's likely they know nothing about Ukraine either. That doesn't mean the North Koreans aren't serious warriors. In the assessment of Volodymyr Dymchenko, a Ukrainian soldier and filmmaker, in particular, the North Koreans have impeccable marksmanship training, he says. North Korean losses might be higher if not for their excellent marksmanship training, explains Dymchenko. Unlike poorly trained Russian recruits, the typical North Korean infantryman has spent years preparing for battle. The statistics on these small drones they have destroyed attest to this fact, according to Dymchenko. From the initial 1,000 square kilometers, that is 386 square miles of Russian territory that Ukrainian troops seized into their lightning offensive in Kursk in August 24, it's thought they retain less than half of that territory now. But that is, of course, focusing on the negative. Rather, it seems miraculous that they've retained a chunk of Russian territory for more than 6 months and created an open wound in Russia's defenses, from which it is bleeding hardware, resources and troops, notwithstanding the damage it's done to the credibility of Putin's regime internally and internationally. Kyiv's surprise incursion was aimed at changing the dynamics of the war, and whereas analysts and vatniks alike tend towards suggesting it has been a failure, I think that is something that only history will judge. And that judgment very much depends on the outcome of the war. Pyongyang's assistance to Moscow extends to large amounts of ammunition and weapons, possibly as high as 50% of artillery shells currently expended by Russia are sourced in North Korea. What they lack in quality, they make up for in quantity. It's an interesting question whether the slaughter of North Koreans in Kursk will damage the security and defense treaties, as well as the deepened bilateral ties between Putin and Kim Jong Un. It's not clear if the Kursk offensive helped in relieving pressure on other fronts in the south and east either, but the main strategic objective now must be to retain territory in Kursk as a leverage for any possible ceasefire or future negotiations. Ukraine's estimate of the damage done to North Korean forces is higher than some Western estimates. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Kindratenko said on January 19th that roughly half of the 11,000 to 12,000 strong North Korean contingent deployed to the embattled Russian region have been killed or wounded. North Korea's high casualty rates undoubtedly relate to lack of experience in modern warfare, but this can hardly be helped by the human wave tactics employed against entrenched Ukrainian positions. It's also been observed that North Korean troops have a strong resolve to avoid capture, even at the cost of their own lives. However, Kindratenko acknowledged the North Koreans are well-trained and motivated fighters who present a significant challenge to Ukrainian soldiers. While in Ukraine, I spoke to numerous people who had contact with battalions operating in Kursk and some who had visited the region themselves, and they all warned against complacency. They all warned against underestimating the potential damage and consequences that North Korean troops can inflict upon Ukraine and its fight against the Russian invasion. But military intelligence chief Kirill Budanov expects Pyongyang to dispatch additional reinforcements to Russia, especially artillery units. But the North Koreans are thought to have suffered losses not only in meat wave assaults across its open fields, it's also been claimed that a Ukrainian strike on a Russian command post in Kursk region killed dozens of Russian and North Korean officers. This was explained by Zelensky to the Associated Press on February 2nd. There was a strong operation by our military. They hit their central command post in the Kursk direction, and they lost key officers of Russia and North Korea, Zelensky said in an interview. The alleged strike was conducted by Ukraine's missile and artillery forces on January 31st, targeting the command post of Russia's Kursk group of forces in the city of Rilsk, around 25 kilometers or 15 miles from the border with Ukraine. It was our military target, a fair one, he said. There was a missile attack from our side and various types of weapons. A complex attack was launched against them, Zelensky said. The North Koreans launched their first assaults in December, marching on foot across snowy fields to attack Ukrainian lines. Despite suffering horrific casualties to Ukrainian mines, artillery and drones, the North Koreans kept coming. The small handful of North Koreans the Ukrainians have captured is indicative of the ruthlessness of the combined Russia-North Korea army, according to Zelensky. Russian forces and other North Korean military personnel usually execute their wounded to erase any evidence of North Korea's involvement in the war against Ukraine, Zelensky claimed. Some videos online on social media seem to attest to this idea. Injured North Koreans sometimes kill themselves, sparing their comrades the ugly responsibility. They are utterly hardened types who, when wounded, follow a single pattern: pull the pin, put a grenade to their head, and good night, wrote Demchenko. So is this the end of the story for North Korean troops in Russia or Ukraine, or even in Western Europe? Well, likely not. And we should take this pause as an opportunity to arm and prepare for more potential waves of brainwashed and fanatical troops, intent on causing carnage and trauma. If we waste this opportunity to arm ourselves and Ukraine, then the consequences could be exceedingly grave.